Hello, Comics Alternative fans. Before we start with the episode, we want to invite all of you to check out our Patreon campaign.
That's right. Go to www.patreon.com/comicsalternative for more details. There you'll find more information about the campaign and the cool rewards levels we have.
For as little as $1 a month, you can help us maintain good quality comics talk, and the more you contribute, the more perks you get.
These include monthly podcast episodes exclusive to Patreon supporters, as well as the chance to help us choose which books we review on the show. So be sure to visit www.patreon.com/comicsalternative and become one of our proud podcast patrons.
Yeah, and now on with the show.
This is the Comics Alternative Interviews, a conversation with Sophie Goldstein. Hello and welcome to another episode of the Comics Alternative Interviews. I'm Derek, one of the two guys with PhDs talking about comics. And today I'm going to be talking with Sophie Goldstein. Her new book, House of Women 2, was released in September, just in time for SPX. I talked with her a little bit at SPX, but we have a much longer and detailed conversation for today. But before we get to that, I want to let all of you guys know that this episode of the Comics Alternative Interviews is brought to you by the great folks at Discount Comic Book Service. Go to their website, dcbservice.com, for all of your comics pre-ordering needs. There you'll find all DC, Marvel, Image, and Dark Horse titles at 40% off of the cover price if you pre-order. For all of the other publishers, you'll find that those discounts are 20 to 35% off of the cover price. And every single month, you're going to find some wonderful and unbelievable specials. Sometimes those specials are at 45% off cover price. Sometimes that's 50% off, but often the discounts are a little more impressive than that. And in fact, for the month of November, you have quite a number of bundles that you can get at great discounts. So for example, you can get the November Vertigo new bundle. That's 12 issues at 50% off the cover price. You can also get the November Valiant bundle at 50% off cover price, and the DC new miniseries bundle at 52% off of the cover price. So bundles are the way to go, but they also have great savings on individual titles, comic books, as well as graphic novels and collections. So go to their website, dcbservice.com. They'll take care of all of your comics pre-ordering needs. And after you do get your comics there, please be sure to send them an email and tell them that the two guys with PhDs sent you. Listeners of the podcast may recall that I have talked with Sophie Goldstein twice in the recent past. First in June, when we were at Heroes Con, and then more recently in September at Small Press Expo. Now, Sophie and I had a very nice time speaking on those occasions, but we thought it would be a good idea to get outside of the convention hall and have a longer one-on-one conversation, and that's what you're about to hear. So without further ado, let's get to the interview. I'm happy to have on the show Sophie Goldstein. Her new work, House of Women 2, came out earlier this season, and I want to welcome you to the show again, Sophie.
Oh, thank you so much. Thank you for having me.
Now, I say again because this year I have talked with you twice. The first time was at HeroesCon, and then the second time was at SPX. But even though we did have, decent conversation, it lasted several, quite a number of minutes actually, both times. We were in the midst of conventions, and so there's a lot of noise and hubbub, and you have other people coming up and wanting to get work from you. So now it's just the two of us, and we can talk in a more leisurely fashion.
Absolutely.
Well, let's begin by me congratulating you on the recent news that your book, The Oven, was mentioned as one of the best graphic novels of 2015 by Publishers Weekly.
Yeah, that was pretty unexpected and weird to be, especially there's only five books, so to be one of five amongst like Tomine and that was pretty cool. It was a pretty heady experience.
Yeah, and in fact, The Oven has been getting quite a bit of love this year. You received not one, but two Ignatz Awards back in September.
Yeah, that was also very surprising to me. Not that I don't like try to affect that I don't think my own work is like has value or anything like that, but I did not expect the people to have the kind of response to The Oven that it's had so far. I mean, it was a pretty small book with a pretty small scope. It's physically small, it's short, and it's also like a very small, like not epic kind of story. But I guess it struck people enough that they paid attention to it, which has been really great.
Yeah, now, The Oven came out, I think, late spring, correct?
Yeah, it came out in April.
That's right, because it was part of our Publisher Spotlight on Ad House that Andy Wolverton and I did not too long before Heroes Con. And in fact, it was because of us discussing The Oven is how you and I met.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, and in fact, I think I've told you before about this, but I'll mention it again on air, so to speak. And that is one of the things that really impressed me was you coming to us at our table at Heroes Con and thanking us for discussing The Oven, which usually doesn't happen. Usually we go up to artists and initiate conversations, whether to interview them or otherwise. And so I was highly impressed that you came to our table.
I honestly, I find that really surprising that more creators wouldn't do that because, as a creator, you put so much time and love into these projects and then they go out into the world. And even if you are getting, even if your sales are good or like there's Amazon likes or, whatever, I think like in our heart of hearts, like what most of us want is to someone to sit down and be like, this is what I think of your book, and not like someone on Amazon, but like someone who has a perspective or knows about comics. So you can kind of like value their feedback, especially once you leave school and you don't have a structured environment. I mean, if you ever did, like lots of cartoonists obviously did not go to CCS. So I am always like super hungry for that feedback. I would like read all the reviews. I can't even understand the perspective of like someone who would read their reviews. Mm-hmm. So when someone takes the time to like look at your work and evaluated it, hopefully positively, but in any way whatsoever, I think that is something that I as a creator appreciate and would like to, personally thank someone for. Although sometimes it can feel, at first it can feel kind of awkward because sometimes I'm like, do they want me to thank them? It's like when someone tweets about it, like, is it weird for me to be like, that I'm just like sitting on the internet, like looking at tweets about myself? Like, I don't know, but I've never had someone be like, ugh, just pretend that I don't exist.
Now, we've been talking about The Oven, and for those of our listeners who have not had the, I guess, wisdom or foresight to listen to our Ad House spotlight from earlier in the year. How would you describe The Oven?
Well, it's definitely a science fiction story, but it's a speculative fiction book or a soft sci-fi book as opposed to hard sci-fi. So it's more focused on societies and interpersonal relationships and how they're affected by technology in the future. I think that's like the general definition of speculative fiction. So it's about this couple, Eric and Sydney, and they leave their very technologically advanced bubble city to go live in the desert with this renegade community that are creating their own kind of back to the land movement in order to buck some of the more stringent population laws that govern the more populated, more modern cities. And that's the jumping off point for the story.
And you described it as kind of a short work, something more like, I guess the fiction literary equivalent would be a novella.
Yeah, that is actually. I've described it as a graphic novella before. I don't know. It sounds a little pretentious, but I do think that is pretty much accurately described. I mean, graphic novel also sounded pretentious at first, and now it's just like accepted nomenclature. But I do think that kind of describes what it is. It's not, it's 80 pages. It's short.
Mm-hmm. Now, you mentioned the sci-fi component, the speculative aspect of The Oven. In looking through, all of your work that I've seen, sci-fi or this kind of softer approach to science fiction, the more speculative type of writing, seems to be an area that you have a particular fondness for.
Yeah, absolutely. Even when I was an undergraduate, for a long time, I really wanted to be a novelist, and the short stories that I wrote were all science fiction. So it's always been something that I've really loved. And when, I did a webcomic for a really long time with my friend Jen Jordan called Darwin Carmichael's Going to Hell. And that was kind of an urban fantasy. I wouldn't describe it as gritty. I would just say urban fantasy. Genre work. And when I came to CCS and I started doing solo stuff, which I hadn't done too much of. I mean, I'd done like 100 pages of this webcomic, but I hadn't written by myself for a while. And science fiction is kind of just what came out. It's what I read a lot of when I was a kid and continued to read off and on as an adult.
Now, you mentioned your time at the Center for Cartoon Studies. Now, you and Jen had been working on Darwin Carmichael for that webcomic before you started CCS, right? Yeah,
for about 2 years prior to my attending CCS, we had been putting out this comic twice a week.
Now, was it your experience in working on that webcomic with Jen that caused you to go to CCS, or had you had plans on attending there anyhow? In other words, did the work on the webcomic more or less kind of solidify the path that you decided to take as an artist?
Yeah, I would definitely say so. Before doing the webcomic, I had taken some continuing education courses at SVA in comics, and I'd done what I think every young adult does who's interested in indie comics. I did autobio comics, like little one-pagers and shit like that. And then I was just kind of playing around, but I think being able to commit to something like doing 2 pages a week, for every week of the year for a couple of years was like a way of showing myself that I was ready to take a more serious step towards making a career.
And so, once you had a couple of years of that webcomic under your belt, you felt that I don't know, you had some, I guess, legitimacy behind you, or at least a sense of direction to where you wanted to go to CCS for a clearer direction or guidance.
Yes and no. I mean, certainly that's what I thought at the time. I thought that I would, not that I would necessarily, we would keep doing Darwin Carmichael forever, but that, like that was, webcomics was the realm that I was going to be working in. And I felt very comfortable with that. I mean, there's a lot of really great things about the webcomics community, and like Darwin Carmichael, although not like super well known or anything, it had a readership. And so I felt like pretty solid about that. But then I have to say, like, I think things are changing now, but at CCS there was not a lot of acknowledgement of webcomics at the time, or like, the staff were not especially well versed in webcomics, and even now, like, I've done Darwin Carmichael is 360 pages, and I can't tell you how many people have written that my longest work to date is The Oven. or House of Women, now that's like, I have 2 volumes and now that's longer than The Oven so far, but I am just like, do you like, it's just it's like there's a hole in the universe where Darwin Carmichael is that like indie comics just can't see. Sometimes it is just, I mean, it's fine, whatever. I think people, for maybe they don't want to see that as part of my work because it's so different, or I don't know. Maybe it's just a lack of doing research. People are busy.
So at CCS, you said that things are changing. Is there more of awareness there that webcomics is the kind of outlet that it actually is? I mean, a lot of people read webcomics.
Yeah, I don't think it's on a staff level, and this is not a criticism of CCS, because I think CCS is like much more on the forefront of the comics industry than a lot of other programs. But I do think the driving force in bringing webcomics into CCS are the students more so than the staff. Like there's students who, like me, come in with a background in webcomics or an interest, or like their favorite comics are webcomics. And they kind of like, it's like, it's basically a cauldron. When you mix all the students together, it's not just the staff and the curriculum that are creating the environment. It's the students as well and the makeup of the class. And it's so individual to different years. Like my year was different than the year that preceded us and the year that followed us. And we all the years have their own characters because they're really small. I mean, there's a max of 24, 25 students per year, and usually there's less than that.
So now, your experience with the webcomic, and you come to CCS. What is the work that you do while at CCS in terms of getting into anthologies? Because you've been in a variety. You've been in the Pitchfork Review, Irene, Dog City. Did this start while you were at CCS?
Yeah, I got into Best American while I was still a student. And then I think pretty much all the other anthologies came after that, starting almost immediately after. I mean, because you can't apply. I mean, you can't apply to Best American Comics, but you can't control whether or not you get in, right? But for the other anthologies where I was doing work specifically for that anthology, after I graduated CCS, I decided, like, my thing this year is I'm going to be in as many anthologies as will accept me. And so I applied to a bunch, or I reached out, or some people contacted me. The Irene, I was in Irene 3, and Irene is this ongoing anthology by that's edited by 3 CCS graduates who are in the year above me: Andy Warner, Dakota McFadzine, and DW.
Mm-hmm.
And they invited me, and that they kind of like they keep an eye on CCS students, and I think they always look for recent graduates who they might want to include in their anthology, as well as like a lot of international people. So they invited me, and then Spike invited me to be a participate in her horror anthology, The Sleep of Reason, and um, then Maple Key, where the chapters of The Oven were originally anthologized without in black and white. So yeah, it was a whole and more that I don't even remember.
Huh. It's interesting because I wasn't aware that your piece in Best American Comics 2013, which is The Good Wife, was actually before your work started appearing in the other anthologies. So, let's talk a little bit about your experience with Best American Comics. I remember reading this. Every year on the Comics Alternative, Andy and I use the penultimate Wednesday of every year to talk specifically and solely about that year's volume of Best American Comics. And then the last episode of the year, Andy and I discuss what we consider the best of that year. And so I remember with the 2013 volume, seeing your work. I don't think I had come across your work before, and it wasn't until about a year and a half or so later with The Oven that I thought, oh, okay, so this is the person that I remember reading in 2013 in the Best American Comics volume. So what was that experience like? I mean, how did you find out that your work was included? It must have been a big deal there being a student at CCS.
It was a big deal. I got an email saying, "Oh, you're in the 2013 Best American," and the email also said specifically, "Do not tell anyone until this is announced." So, and I was sitting in class. Definitely should probably not have been checking my email, and I was just like filled with this like fizzy, ecstatic excitement that I really haven't, like, I think it was like the most extreme of sensation like that I have felt maybe in my life. And because this is like, it was the first thing big thing that had happened to me really with comics. And then I ran home and I told my boyfriend and I called my parents and swore them to secrecy, not that they would like have anyone to tell. And then I sat on it for like 3 months.
That must have been tough.
Yeah, it was a little tough. I mean, it ended up that by the time other people found out, I wasn't over it, but I'd already kind of processed it. So I was like, I seemed like probably really chill about it. But it was really exciting and very surprising. I mean, the comic, the Good Wife, the 10-page comic that's in that volume was a CCS class, not a class assignment, like a homework assignment. One of the ones in the first year of the program where we're supposed to adapt an Aesop fable.
Mm-hmm.
So I mean, it's extraordinary to have your student work accepted. Yeah.
Yeah. So, and with The Good Wife, and I noticed that this, you mentioned the fable aspect of it. Your other short pieces have that same feel. So, for instance, your comic Mother, does have kind of a folktale tone to it. But then I could go down the list of many of your other works that seem to have that same thing. So I'm wondering, is this a mode of writing, this kind of short parable or fable-like means of storytelling that really appeals to you?
Yes and no. With Mother. So the editor of Pitchfork magazine reached out to me. I think his name is Michael Reynolds. It's been a while, and he and he had seen my comic in Best American, and he wanted something like that. Like that is what he told me. So so when I did that comic, like I very much was trying to keep in the same style, which I did have some mixed feelings about because, but I don't know. I mean, it was my style. It wasn't, but it felt a little unnatural to try and like manufacture a story that had the same feeling as another story that it just kind of flowed. Um, but I mean, it was 2 pages. I think it was, people liked it. He liked it. So I think that was fine.
And, but in other stories like Idle, Ice, and then Baron Fox, I mean, they have that same feel as well.
Yeah, yeah. Well, I think in some of it was trying to like, because Idol I made, this was after I did The Good Wife, but before Best American. But I mean, I got a really good response from my classmates to The Good Wife. And so I thought I would try and like do more things that were in that style. So Idol was kind of an attempt to do another story set in a similar world, which I don't think ultimately story was successful. So it's not, I don't know, it's difficult. I think with science fiction, with my other science fiction work, I can kind of sit down and just like craft a story and, like kind of punch through it in a way, or, like just work on it every day and get a good story out of it. But with these fable kind of mythic feeling ones, I think it relies a little more on inspiration.
Mm-hmm.
So I have another short story that's in the same world that I really want to do, and hopefully I will get to do that sometime soon. But I don't think that I'm going to be just like churning them out anytime soon because of that kind of issue.
Well, we should mention now that if people are listening to this and they're at a computer or some kind of mobile device, if they want to right now see examples of what we're discussing, they can go to your website, redinkradio.com. That's one word, redinkradio.com. And on the comics tab, if you click that, you provide all these comics, or at least most of the ones listed here, people can read in their entirety.
Yeah, pretty much everything that I've done that isn't restricted for licensing contract reasons is on there.
Mm-hmm.
So I think at this point it's a pretty, it would get you like, you'd be there for maybe an hour. You could read
so after going through your work on Red Ink Radio, someone could come away with a feel of Sophie.
Oh, God, I guess so.
Now, another thing about these stories, and then others as well, these shorter works, for instance, Coyote and Strands, and especially Edna, too. One of the things I notice about your work in your style is that you seem to love a lack of unequivocal endings. You like to just end a narrative without any kind of threads neatly tied up. And personally, I appreciate that.
I like the way that you put that. You like a lack of unequivocal endings.
I tend to privilege ambiguity.
Oh, yeah. Well done.
So, the way that, let's say, Idle ends or Edna 2, or any of the others that we've been discussing, it's almost as if you stop your story before what I think most readers may consider a comfortable or a good conclusion, a wrap-up, a sense of closure. For me, what that does is it opens up the story in ways that a lot of storytellers, I think, aren't able to do when they provide nice, neat endings to their narratives. And another thing that it does, I think, is that it kind of brings out the socio-political undertone or sometimes overtone of the stories that you're telling, because in some way you can read these stories quite politically.
Yeah, I mean, there are definitely ones that have more of a political bent, but my primary purpose is never the politics. I think that kind of just comes up, in the wash. But yeah, and also the unequivocal, the equivocating endings. Um, I in some of those stories, I think what people see as being unclear endings are clear to me, but maybe it's a failure on my part to communicate clearly at times. But they always feel like the right place to stop. It's never like I'm like, oh, here's the ending, but let's just cut these 2 pages from the end. Like that's never. It always feels like with Mothership Blues, I've had a lot of people come up and be, or not, a number of people be like, what happens at the end? Like, and I just like, if someone gets to the end of that story and they don't know what's going to happen to the characters, I just think that just boggles my mind.
Well, it's not so much that you don't complete the story. I think you do. It's that you don't show us. You take us, to, toward the end of the trail, so to speak, but you don't walk there with us. I mean, there's definitely, I don't know if that's the best metaphor, but there's definitely a direction, I think. I mean, someone, for me at least, reading Mothership Blues, being confused with the ending. I wasn't confused by the ending, but that's different from you not actually writing, a definitive ending of what goes on with these characters.
Yeah. Well, so I think with that, there's a lot of power in the reader's imagination.
Mm-hmm.
And I think leaving space for the reader to make the connections themselves rather than, and this is not just with endings, but with anything with background information about characters or aspects of the environment or anything like that. The more that you can suggest and leave it to the readers to kind of pull it together, I think the better it's going to be. I think people, I, I as an avid reader myself, I know I feel more involved in stories that leave some room for me to do some mental work. Uh, so in in my stories, I try to do that as much as possible. I mean, sometimes you have to give them information just so the story isn't completely confusing. But when possible, it's better if you leave it to the reader.
Yeah. And another thing that the endings do, for me at least, is that it helps to set the stage for the tone. At times your stories have, I don't necessarily want to say melancholic feel to them. Somber, maybe a better word. Definitely in contrast to what we find going on in Darwin Carmichael is Going to Hell, right? I mean, the
Yeah.
comic the webcomic that you and Jen did, was, humorous, upbeat, bright, literally bright in terms of its use of colors. But both your shorter and your longer narratives seem to have kind of a contemplative feel to them by the time we get to the end. And I'm thinking in particular of The Oven. I mean, I wouldn't call it a negative or a downer ending, but it's not all happiness and sunshine.
Yeah. Well, I don't know.
Or
I think
literally it's sunshine, maybe, because they have to stay out of it. Yeah.
um, well, I mean, a lot of the tone of Darwin Carmichael is, of course, influenced by having a collaborator in
Mm-hmm.
Jen, and I think, and we're working on another project together that we're writing right now, and writing with Jen, we write the stories together, and then I draw them. That's how it's been working out, and the stuff that we do together all is much more humorous and lighthearted and at times silly than anything I do my own. So I can only conclude that Sophie minus Jen equals like desolation and melancholy.
Well, let's talk a little bit now about a work that it is one of your more recent projects. House of Women. Now, the second installment of that came
Mm-hmm.
out right at the time of SPX. I remember you telling me that you were going to have copies of House of Women 2 there, and I think, did it come out that weekend? Did you start
It
selling them then?
did. Yeah, that was its first appearance.
Yes, and I got my copy.
Woo!
Yes. So now this is the second. The first one came out, was it 2013 while you were still at CCS?
It was my thesis project.
Okay. So describe House of Women. I mean, we have two installments of it so far, but for our listeners, describe the premise.
Well, there's a group of women, four women, who are part of this larger colonialist and interstellar culture. And they go to this remote planet called Mopu to set up a school, and with the idea that they're going to kind of indoctrinate the natives in their larger culture to kind of bring them into the fold of um, of their culture and society. So they set up a school and they kind of corral some of the young native alien population. Um, but of course, because this is a story, things don't go as planned, and there are difficulties. In particular, some with the aliens, and some. I mean, in this case, they're the aliens, but some with the native population, and some with another. There's a male who, one of their society, who is living on the planet already when they get there, and his presence kind of throws a wrench into the works as well.
And that's J.L. Dean. Is that how you pronounce his name? J.L.?
I say Yale, but
Yale?
yeah, pronounced like a Y.
Oh, okay.
I don't. I mean, it doesn't really matter that much. It's a book, but
Yale of the Four Eyes.
yes, yeah, he has four eyes, and like why he has that is also a question that gets bandied about a bit. So there's a lot of mysterious aspects that haven't quite been resolved yet. So I probably won't talk about those.
No, I wouldn't want you to give away any spoilers, not only for me, but also for our listeners. And you mentioned the mystery, and that's one of the things I really appreciate about both of these installments of House of Women, in that I think each of them is driven by certain mysteries that move us forward and then into the next installment of the story. So in the first book, one of the things that we see, and this does involve Yael, is some kind of maybe unspoken competition for the affection of JL between, and is her name Sarai?
Sarai.
Sarai. Sarai. She seems to be the leader of this band of four women from the Empire. So it's some kind of competition between her and Rivka. And Rivka is, I guess, the scientist of the bunch. She's the one who does the research. She also does the cooking.
Yeah, there's only four of them.
Yeah. So, but we get to see, and I love the way that you handle this so deftly, is the facial expressions of Rivka, even from the very beginning when we first see her. I mean, I could tell that expression on her face. She's someone to watch out for.
Yeah, she's definitely one of the most fun characters to draw because she does have this like slightly, well, not slightly, she has a pretty villainous face at times. Which only gets more so as the story goes on. There's a panel in the second volume towards the end that's a close-up of her face is like my favorite thing that I've drawn in the whole thing so far.
That's the last panel on the last or the second to the last page.
I'd have to look. Honestly, I don't remember, but it's like a close-up. I don't think it's the very last panel, but it's like a close-up of her eyes. And I was looking at.
Oh, I see what you're talking about now.
Yeah, and for House of Women, like I've when I started doing it, I was looking at a lot of Art Nouveau or fin de siècle. I'm probably murdering the French pronunciation, but anyway, like these late 1800s, early 1900s illustrators, in particular Aubrey Beardsley, but also painters like Klimt and Sam Muka and like. And so these guys, and so I was looking at a lot of that, but then, all of that stuff is very much inspired by the importation of Japanese printmaking into the West. So I started looking at a lot of Japanese printmaking, and I had this great book from this exhibit of Shinhaga painting lithographs, which is kind of like you have the Japanese scrolls. They're like the floating world of like courtesans and that sort of thing. And then there's kind of a second generation of that took place kind of after the Western, because Japan was closed off to the West for a long time. But then there started being, like Westerners were allowed in, and Japanese artists were seeing some Western art, but also like Western fashions and that sort of thing. And they were integrating that into some of their art and lithography. And in the 1910s and 20s and 30s, and the Shinhaga is the art from that period. And so I was looking at a lot of that. And so there's a lot of particular frames and poses and like ways of drawing the figure that I just took and used in House of Women. And that her face in that is like very much inspired by some Japanese art.
Rivka's face and her expressions.
Her face, her expressions, most of the shots that I borrowed from paintings are ones that I used for her. Some of these I ended up on the cutting room floor. I mean, they'll be in volume 3. I thought I would have 2 volumes, and then I realized there's no way, so they'll be in volume 3.
In fact, I was going to ask you, how long is this going to be? So will it be in 3 volumes?
Yeah, so I think probably volume 3 will be about the same length. So volume 1 is 56 pages, volume 2 is 58 pages. So I expect it'll be altogether like 180 pages. I don't know math. Yeah. And and then and I'll definitely publish all the individual hand collected volumes, but I would also like to pitch the collection to a regular publisher, because making these books is really labor intensive, and I cannot tell you how sick I am of die cutting at this point in my life.
In fact, you raised 2 issues that I specifically wanted to ask you regarding House of Women. One was, will this be collected in, all of the volumes of House of Women into one volume? And it seems like that's going to be the case. But then I also wanted to talk with you about the way that you produce the individual volumes, because when I got my copy of Volume 1, which was back in June at HeroesCon, the story is just part of the beauty of that book, but it's the way that you put everything together, the way that you crafted, the cover as well as the interior. And I guess that goes back to what you were describing earlier about that Art Nouveau, that Japanese influence as well.
Yeah.
With the cover, the cuts in the first page. What do you call that? When there is
die cuts.
Okay, so die cuts, yeah.
Yeah, well, so one of the, because this was my thesis project, one of the requirements for the thesis project is that you also get evaluated on your packaging design, which is to say, the outside of your book or however else you plan to present it to the committee. So a lot of my classmates or a lot of CCS students will make these like very elaborate presentations, but you only have to produce 8 for the purposes of graduation. But when I did House of Women, I knew that I wanted to take this book to conventions. So instead I made a design that would be where I could mass produce it. I mean, to the extent that you can mass produce a mini comic. So I put a lot of effort into thinking through different aspects of the book design and looking for the right kind of paper and all that sort of stuff. And I think it makes a really big difference. A lot of people pick up the book because of the cover. And hopefully, I hope that they like the story, but I think that the double die cuts and the gold paper and whatever is a big aspect of it, which is important because, like, in this age of digital stuff, like, physical books, they kind of need to there needs to be a reason for someone to have it that way.
Oh, exactly. And, we should mention that your book with Jen, Darwin Carmichael, you guys, it was a webcomic, but you did release it in book form, and you carry those with you when you go to conventions. But you're right. The thing about House of Women is, I mean, it's a different kind of packaging. So it's not just putting together something to make it available for people to read while they hold it in their hands. I mean, it's an art object.
Yeah, that's how I hope people look at it. It is, for a mini comic, it's expensive. It's $20, which is the price of, like, what you would pay for a graphic novel. And it's 56 pages, so it's not nearly as long. But like, when you think, people are usually pretty understanding, because they can see it's handmade, or if they for some reason can't see it's handmade, I do tell them, like, this is hand bound, all these die cuts are done by hand, blah 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 blah, and they're like, oh my god, it's so much work. I'm like, yes, it is. It's so much work.
Now you called this a mini comic, and I found that curious.
Well, that's what it won the Ignatz for. So, I mean, technically, I think it is a mini comic. It's a self-produced. I guess you could call it a graphic novel, but I mean, I feel like The Oven barely qualifies as a graphic novel at 80 pages, so much less House of Women at 56.
Yeah. Well, I mentioned that. I mean, I get tired of, attempts to kind of categorize this, is it a graphic novel, graphic memoir? After a while, it's just, well, what difference does it make? It's just, I guess I ask about the mini comic. When I think of a mini comic, I think of something quite a bit smaller, literally smaller, and also thinner. That, the kind of things that maybe, people leave at local comic shops and
Yeah.
you can pick up for $3 or $5.
Yeah. Well, I guess it really, yeah. I mean, that is the tradition. And when you call something a mini comic, that's audit. That's a diminutive name, right? It says mini in the title. So, but people like have taken the mini comic concept to all different kinds of ends. And I'd actually say that House of Women is a pretty traditional book, compared to a lot of stuff that I've seen at conventions where the bookmaking is even more to the forefront.
So when can we expect the third volume of House of Women to come out?
Well, my plan is to have it ready for SBX 2016, but much like the second volume, if other projects come up in the meantime, those might have to take precedent because, of course, working on House of Women is completely uncompensated, and I am a full-time freelancer. So if a paying project comes along and I need to pay my rent, then that's going to have to be a part of my decision, which is, it is what it is. That's life as a freelancer.
Mm-hmm. Now, in terms of SPX, one of the things I definitely wanted to ask you is your experience working with that organization. And I believe this year you were one of the jurors, right?
Yeah, I was.
And so I wanted to ask about, what does a juror do for SPX? Do you decide on what to include under what category? Fill me in.
So basically, what happens is you get asked to be a juror member, and you accept or don't accept. It's a secret, obviously, until after the decisions come out, or when the decisions come out. And if you accept, then you get many, many, many boxes of comics delivered to your house. I could not emphasize how many boxes. It was kind of like, which sounds amazing, and in many ways was, because I got like pretty much every important comic that you would want to buy. In 2015, I got that book, right? So that part was pretty cool. But there's like anyone can submit, so there's a lot of stuff. I'm just going to issue the whole like every snowflake is beautiful thing. Now, there's a lot of crap
Right.
that you kind of have to wade through, and I didn't want to just dismiss anything out of hand, so I would like make the effort to at least like open every comic to ascertain for certain whether or not I hated it before putting it aside. And there's still, even like among stuff that I liked or stuff that I loved, there were just like so many things. So I had like these piles, and it took over the whole house. Um, and you kind of like, they have a description of each of the categories, so it's up to the judges to kind of decide whether or not something fits in a category. And if we have questions, we can talk to Eden Miller, who kind of like is the juror wrangler, you know.
The
And
juror wrangler?
juror wrangler.
Wow.
Yeah. And so at the end of it, I had all these piles, and then it was still it was hard because you make your choices and you kind of rank your. I hope this is stuff that I can talk about. I don't know why it would be a secret. And you rank your choices, and obviously, although I was nominated, I could not nominate myself. I feel like I should. I always feel like I should say that. And then at one point, I was trying to decide best mini comic and best comic, and I just would take all the mini comics that I liked, and I like laid them out on the floor, so they covered like a 10-foot by 10-foot area, and I was just like walking among them, like be like trying to choose. I would like pick some and put them aside, be like, no, these are not worthy, and then I would. It was hard. It was a lot of responsibility, or it felt like a pretty heavy load.
And we should mention that, as a juror, you guys, and how many of you are there?
There were four of us.
Okay, so the four of you select the ones that from which others will choose, right? Because the actual voting is anyone who participates in SPX, and they have ballots right there. So anyone who comes to the con, they can vote if they ask for a ballot.
Yeah. So it was like, also it was kind of like ethically challenging for me in a way, because I was like, well, you know what, should I just base my decisions on my taste, or like on like whether this is objectively good, which I pretty much instantly dismiss, because like there is no objective thing when you're talking about art, or the idea of it is a little silly. So I just ended up making the decision early on that I had been selected as a jury member because of my particular point of view. So I would choose the comics that particularly appealed to me. And I do have pretty specific tastes. So that made it, because there's things that are where the art is really impressive. But for me, I'm always going to focus more on story as like my primary interest in when I read a comic. So there was a lot of stuff that I just dismissed, could kind of like put aside out of hand, because there's a lot of people who make comics that don't have a story, especially in the like indie artsy area. And although some of them are just really, really beautiful, and there's a lot of really talented artists, those to me don't have a lasting value. And that is my particular perspective, but that, again, that's like, I just decided that would have to be enough.
Now, have you found that your success, or the attention, let's say, put it that way, that you have gotten at SPX, and, I mentioned earlier that the Oven, this year you won twice, but you also won the previous year for the first House of Women, right?
Yeah.
Yeah. So have you found that with the attention that you've gotten at SPX and the Ignatz Award, that has helped to solidify your, let's say, your brand? Are you getting more attention, more requests for other freelance work?
Yeah. I mean, it's definitely there's definitely been a trajectory for my career, um, in a kind of rising, a sense of rising action. um, I don't know, like it wasn't like, I kind of expected after a House of Women one that someone like I would be like, well, maybe a publisher will want to publish it, but like that I didn't have anyone contact me about that until much later, actually. So it doesn't happen the way that I would like have expected it to happen. I think it's more. I think for people with awareness of an artist or something, they have to hear your name like maybe like there's a magical number of times, but like, maybe by the fourth or fifth time that your name comes up, then you like come into their awareness as a person. So I think that every little thing that happens helps that kind of thing, but it's not like one thing happened and suddenly it was a brand new world. Um, I mean, I'm in a very different place than I was a couple of years ago. That's definitely true. But in terms of, and I do have a lot of opportunities. That being said, I'm still like don't have any money, but this is the life I have chosen.
Yeah. Because, I ask you this because you had mentioned earlier about being approached by, I guess, the editor of Pitchfork Review, which turned into your short comic Mother. And then just recently, a comic of yours, Leopard Drums Up Dinner, appeared in the Fables book that First Second just recently published.
Yeah. And that was edited by Chris Duffy.
And these are great books, by the way. What he's been pulling together with the fables, the fairy tales, and the nursery rhymes. Those are just great collections.
Yeah, and he's a great editor. I had such a nice time working with him, and I think with Chris Duffy, I think that I first met him when he came to do an industry day at CCS, and I wasn't a student, but I was working for the school in like an administrative capacity for a year. So I think that was the first time. I think that was the first time I met him, and then I've seen him at subsequent shows. And I actually think that is like really how the industry works in a lot of ways, is that you keep seeing the same people time and time again. And if you are like a pleasant person and not a complete dickwad, then and you just like, I always tell, like, I get these questions like, "What? How do I break into comics?" and da da da. And I think just bringing your work to conventions and giving it to people who you admire, and being pleasant and not like not trying to turn every conversation into like a job interview or something like that. Like nobody wants that. Just be a person. Be generous with your comics. Be generous with your time. That's probably one of the best things that you can do. But I don't know. There's no formula that I've figured out. I'm hoping that like over time I will somehow figure out the money part of it, which has definitely been the slowest part so far. But yeah, I don't know. Comics. That's always going to be a hard thing, right?
Yeah. I noticed that you've also done a bit of work for study group comics. You have a few stories out there. In fact, most recently, your short piece Anniversary came out for Halloween. So tell me a little bit about your association with Study Group.
I think when did I first meet? I met Zach at a show a long time ago, and I don't remember the specifics. But I guess I must have given him some comics or something.
And you're talking about Zach Soto.
Zach Soto, yeah. And so he does these calls. I mean, these are both like calls for Halloween related comics. And I guess I was he added me to that roster of people that he emailed about it. I hope this is like the true story and I'm not just making this up because like my memory is very hazy. But that both of those comics are from other publications that were, within the contract is like, they have exclusive printing rights for this long, and then after that you can basically do whatever you want with the story. And that so with both of these, that time period had elapsed, and they were both horrifying. So I just kind of gave them to him. I mean, I'm not compensated for those comics, but I think my understanding of Study Group is that it has a nice audience of, people who read indie comics and stuff like that. And certainly nobody looks at my personal website. So I thought it would get bigger readership. I don't get a lot of traffic on my site. I think maybe like once the traffic that I get is people who come and will read through all my comics and then they will like not visit again, which is fine. That's what it's there for.
Well, I asked about Study Group not long ago. My colleague who used to do the monthly web comic show with me, Andy Wolverton, and I think you've met him. He and I focused an entire webcomic show on Study Group. And so we talked about Zach's work, Francois Vignot's Titan. And I know that a number of other creators like Farrell Dalrymple does work there. So, I really like what comes out of Study Group. So it's really nice that, you're part of the group as well. Even though you don't get compensated, hey, it's a way of getting more attention.
Yeah, no, I don't think that wasn't a criticism. I think that it's perfect for what it does. I don't have to have the effort of trying to like, put it out there to a new audience. But anyone who's following, if I post on Tumblr or if I on my own website, which I do, like the people who visit that are people who already know my work, unlike people who might see it on Study Group. So I think that's great. And I think that format for what he's doing is serializing stuff, I think is great. And my impression is that publishers don't see that as the turnoff that it initially was thought to be. Like, oh, if you put it for free on the web, nobody will ever buy the book. But I think that's kind of going by the wayside. So it can be a great way for an artist to continually put themselves keep themselves in the public eye or like keep having new stuff on the web while still working on a longer project.
Oh, I agree. I mean, I've read, Zach's, Francois, and, Farrell's work on Study Group, but then I've gone on after I've read it online to get hard copies.
Yeah. There's a number of webcomics that I've been following for a long time that I ended up buying hard copies, or webcomics where I just bought the hard copy. I used to read a lot of webcomics when I was an office worker. That's how I started reading them back after I graduated college. And not comics. I'm not going to go into the history of my reading of comics, but but since now I am a freelancer, I do not spend as much time surfing the internet, and consequently, I'm like, don't read that many webcomics anymore. So now when I want to read a webcomic, I basically buy the book that eventually comes out.
And, earlier this year, Study Group, as well as another, or I guess a bunch of smaller micro publishers, announced that they had a distribution relationship with Alternative Comics, and so now Alternative Comics is helping to distribute work from the print copies not only of Study Group but also Revival House, Hick and Hock, Hang Die Editions, and so this is, I think, or at least I hope, and another way for people to find out about the stuff that's going on with publishers like Study Group. So that being said, I mean, do you have any plans of either taking some of the stuff that you've already published on Study Group, or maybe even new work, and putting it out through Study Group in print form?
No, I haven't thought about it. And Zach hasn't approached me about it. So those Study Group comics are they're weird ones, to put it mildly. And I think that if I did do a collected volume of shorter stuff, it would be my like more straight. I guess one of them is pretty clearly science fiction. But anyway, I would do a collection of my science fiction short stories into a single volume, and I think I might do a print on demand for that and sell it at shows. I don't know. I'd like to do a couple more before I ever did anything like that. But like I have other kind of stuff that I'm figuring out. I'm trying to figure out what are the next. There's a couple different project ideas that I'm kind of considering working on. Sometimes just choosing what you're going to work on is like one of the hardest parts about being an artist because there's always so many different things you could be doing. And I try to keep the perspective that, I still have like 30 to 40 years of making comics ahead of me. So if I don't get everything done immediately, there's time. But sometimes I still feel a lot of pressure to be doing like, what's the best thing to be working on right now?
Mm-hmm. Well, let me ask you, what are you working on right now? In addition to, you already mentioned another collaboration with Jen Jordan. In addition to that, what other comics can we expect from you in the not-too-distant future?
Well, these past 2 months have been pretty solidly freelance work. So right now I'm coloring a graphic novel that John Chad has written and illustrated for Second. So that's like a straight up freelance gig. And then there's another, I guess they're all freelance, but like that's not my comic, although I love working on it. And then the other one is a chapter of this German textbook that's very complicated to explain. It's a freelance gig. And then, but both of those.
A German textbook?
Yup. It's called Anthropocene Age. Anthropocene Era. Oh, God, I hope she doesn't listen to this so she can't hear me mangling the name. And so that there's a lot of interesting stuff with that, but it's it's a freelance gig that I wouldn't be doing if I wasn't being compensated for it. Although I wouldn't have accepted it if the subject matter wasn't interesting. Anyway, so I won't be going back to my truly personal projects until 2016, and I'm hoping when I get to 2016, because these past 6 months of this con season have been really crazy for me. And I was hoping to just take a month where I was just kind of not going anywhere and just doing a lot of writing. And try and get as much, because I have all these ideas and stuff that I haven't been able to work on. And I'd like to write a lot of material, and then I can kind of pick and choose what of that material I actually want to take to completion. But it'll be there, instead of being this like vague idea in my head.
Well, now, do you write out your stories before you start really illustrating them, or is the illustration all a part of the writing process for you?
I thumbnail my stories ahead of time. And my thumbnails I do like super rough thumbnails that are just kind of the layouts and where the characters are. And then I'll do a little bit cleaned up, slightly larger thumbnails with a script, and I like to have it so I can get feedback on it from a couple trusted close associates, and before I take it to the drawing stage. I've only the only comic I've ever done that's been a panel to panel, page to page thing is Ice, which is on my website. And that was the exercise for that comic, is to not have it planned out ahead of time.
That's interesting, because of all of your shorter pieces, or actually of all of your comics that I've seen, that has to be the most abstract.
Well, yeah. There's a good reason for that. If you don't plan things, it's probably going to go in a weird direction.
Well, that's funny, because I thought it was intentionally abstract. Are you saying it's partly accidentally abstract?
Partly, I mean, do you mean abstract in look or abstract in story?
Both.
Well, experimenting with not planning it, and then I was additionally experimenting with a brush for the first. That was the first time I inked anything with a brush, and that was another. It was like an exercise for. It was a dream comic. There was a dream comic assignment for CCS. So that was like started with a tiny nugget of a dream, and then I just kind of like went with it in another direction. So yeah, but I think that for my purposes, I much prefer to have a very tight, structured, completed script before I go to art. And I know for some artists that takes all the fun out of it. And maybe that's true, but I'd much rather have a strong story than enjoy the process. I don't know. That sounds weird.
So, Sophie, where can our listeners find your work?
Probably the primary place would be on my personal website, which is Red Ink Radio, redinkradio.com. Particularly under the comics tab, there's a lot of links to complete short stories and things like that for people to read for free on my site. There's also, I have a Tumblr, redinkradio.tumblr.com, and I'm also on Twitter at redinkradio. I have this branding thing down pat. It's all Red Ink Radio, so just look for that.
In fact, I wanted to ask you about Red Ink Radio. Where does that name come from?
Oh boy, I wish I had a better origin story for this, but it's my hair is red. I ink comics, and I like listening to the radio. It's pretty compelling, right?
Wow, I was thinking that it had something to do with your red hair, and for our listeners who haven't seen any images of you, you have quite striking red hair. It's one of the first things I noticed about you. So I was thinking, okay, I bet you Red Ink Radio has something to do with your hair, but then the ink and the radio part, I was clueless.
I guess I was going for. I just like the way that those words mush together, and like whatever handle that you pick, you're probably going to regret it eventually. And Sophie Goldstein, unfortunately, is not as an uncommon name as I would like. So SophieGoldstein.com and all those other things they're taken. Never mind Sophie Gold, that's taken. S Goldstein, taken. What a mess.
Yeah, so there's redinkradio.com. There's also your Tumblr and your Twitter accounts, right, that people can find out what you're doing. And if they wanted to, now, they can find The Oven, they can get it in bookstores, they can get it online at Amazon. But if they wanted to get copies of House of Women 1 and 2, how could they do so?
So probably the best way to do that would be to order it directly off my personal website. Because when you go to redinkradio.com, there's a store tab, and that'll take you directly to my personal store. Because I don't have distribution for House of Women 1 and 2, mainly because they're so laborious to produce that I can't really afford to sell them at half price to stores, which is the general deal when you're doing wholesale books. So I have to sell them one-on-one, which is good because otherwise I think I'd have to be like a little one-person bookmaking factory to keep up with orders. But I can create a artificial scarcity through my laziness.
So they can get House of Women there, but they can also find a copy of Darwin Carmichael is Going to Hell and something we didn't even discuss, Poopy Claus.
Yep. Yeah, that is a children's book that I illustrated, and it's about a cat that has trouble with his litter box. And it's adorable, and it's for all ages.
Wow. So there you go. Find these copies of her digital comics and order your copy of the hard copies, House of Women, The Oven, Darwin Carmichael, and Poopy Claus on her website.
Mm-hmm.
So, Sophie, I want to thank you for being on the Comics Alternative. It's great talking with you again, and I'm glad that we finally had the opportunity to do a show just the two of us.
Absolutely. This is awesome.
So there you have it, my interview with Sophie Goldstein. I want to thank Sophie for taking the time and talking with me on the Comics Alternative. It's always nice talking with her. She's a very pleasant individual. And if you happen to be at a convention where she is displaying her works, make sure you go up and talk with her, get some of her comics there, and see just how friendly she is. Very, very pleasant. And if you want to find some great comics like the ones that Sophie produces, then you definitely have to check out the website of our sponsor, dcbservice.com. Go there for all of your comics pre-ordering needs. Or if you want to read some of Sophie's books that we were discussing in our interview, then you can get some of these through Amazon. And in fact, go to our website, comicsalternative.com, click on the Amazon affiliate link or the banner, and then from there you can do a search for books of hers. And right now you can find The Oven, Fable Comics, which she has a contribution, and also Poopy Claws. So get her books through Amazon.com. And in fact, if you get anything through Amazon.com, please do so through our affiliate links. It really does help. And after you do get your comics there, get in touch with us and let us know the kind of things you're going to be reading. If you go to our website, comicsalternative.com, you'll see that you can send us a voicemail through the wonders of SpeakPipe. Just click and record. It's as simple as that. Or you can call us the old-fashioned way. Our phone number is 4153-COMICS. That's 415-326-6427. You can also email us. We are 2guys@comicsalternative.com, or you can email me directly. I'm Derek at comicsalternative.com. You can also find us on Twitter. We're at the number 2 guys with PhDs, and thanks to everyone who keeps retweeting our tweets. We appreciate it. We're also on other places in the social media sphere, such as Facebook, Tumblr, Instagram, Google+, Pinterest, and YouTube. You can subscribe to the podcast through iTunes. You can stream us on Stitcher. You can also find us on TuneIn, and you can find every single one of our episodes, as well as our reviews and the comics-related commentary that we post on our blog. And that's at comicsalternative.com. So thanks for listening to this interview. We'll be back soon with more. Until then, take care.